A woman's place is in the kitchen. This is the European proverb. No African language has the equivalent. We didn't know about subjugating women in Africa until white men came to teach us.
Have you heard the concept earthing or grounding? Well, let me tell you a little bit about it.
It's so sad that people don't know the difference between modernization and civilization.
Oh yeah, Picasso really stole from African art. And some people talk about it as an African period that only lasted a couple of years, but I would say that it was his inspiration from African art that shifted him into the style that defined his most celebrated works well after that. Like in general, he owed everything to African artists because before his African period, he was making stuff like this. Realistic humans, until Lambo, 1907, African period. Now he's playing with form and way more asymmetry. The rhythm is totally different. The inspirations are very clear.
If you liked Picasso's art, then you'll love the real thing.
We are being scammed and gaslit on a global scale, but unfortunately, we still haven't realized it yet. So we fall for the lies, we fall for the scam. This is basically Yahoo.
See, it's so sad that people don't know the difference between modernization and civilization. See, African people have been civilized for millions of years. Now, let me tell you an instance now. Growing up, I knew people that used to wash their teeth with charcoal and ashes. We used to look at them as uninformed, uncivilized. But guess what? Those people actually knew what's up. See what I found? A repackaged charcoal toothpaste. Now, many years ago, if you have told an African to use charcoal to brush their teeth, especially the educated ones, the elites, they'll be like, oh, it's fetish, it's dirty, it's this, it's that. But guess what? Now that Igbo people don't package them now, they go use them because now Igbo package them.
Same way the modern day toothbrush isn't civilization but actually modernization, because in my continent, for example, people have been brushing their teeth since time immemorial. Okay, we have been using frayed twigs and what we call chewing sticks to brush our teeth, and hell, people still use chewing stick till this day. And I just quickly wanted to throw that in there, seeing as we're talking about toothpaste, because how can we talk about toothpaste without talking about toothbrush? You get?
See, we need to value our ancestral wisdom. There's nothing bad about it. If not, we will always be behind the white people. So sad.
Very true. We've got to learn how to work on and build on our already existing ideas, because when we don't do that, we leave the opportunity for them folks to come in and do that. And then what happens is they would come in, work on these ideas, then claim that they were the ones who came up with said ideas and then take all of the credit for it. And then the next thing you know, they would be the one going down in history as the ones who came up with the idea, when in actuality that wasn't the case. And now you find yourself in this situation where you're trying to prove that, hell, that wasn't the idea. Actually, it's our people that used to do that first. And we know how difficult it can be when you are trying to speak against certain things that have been documented in a certain way down in history. Daily, I see African people, Native American people constantly fighting against the lies in history that was documented. Like, it's a lot. It's not a very easy task trying to debunk lies in quote-unquote history, especially when these historical lies have gone far and near and are now believed as facts. Another very good example on the difference between civilization and modernization would be the baby wearing culture, how it started versus how it looks today, which is a culture you would find in indigenous communities across Africa, in Asia, and I believe in the Americas as well. Side note, for those of us who don't know, it was in the 60s that the idea for the modern day baby carrier that we know of today came about, when a young American woman who was in West Africa because she was spending time as a volunteer for the Peace Corps was inspired by the the African women, West African women, and how they carried their babies on their backs. Her name is Anamora, by the way, and she was a nurse at the time. She loved the African women's idea of carrying their babies on their backs and how easy it was for them. So much so that when she went back to America, she decided to quote unquote invent the snuggly. Like the invention was not already invented. What the women in Africa, in Asia, in the Americas, and where else indigenous women were doing this, that was already the invention. What those women were doing was the invention. This is a ripoff. She's riding on their invention. In my humble opinion, that's how I see it. You can't repackage someone else's idea, or to be more accurate here, some other groups of women's idea, and then come out and say you've invented something. No, all you did was repackage their idea. That's what you did. You did not invent something. To invent something means you are coming up with a new idea, something that no one has heard of or seen before. Modernization is actually repackaging. Like, it's repackaged ideas, repackaged systems, and there are a plethora of examples to choose from. Like what they now call earthing.
Have you heard the concept earthing or grounding? Well, let me tell you a little bit about it.
Which is basically walking around barefooted, something that our ancestors used to do, right? Not because they could not make footwears, because there are evidence that footwears existed back then, but I'm guessing because our ancestors knew the benefit of walking around barefooted, so they chose to walk around barefooted more. Or maybe it's the comfort you get from walking around barefooted, because for real, there is this comfort you get when you walk around barefooted. It's quite similar to the comfort you get if you were to compare how you feel when you are wearing baggy clothing versus how you feel when you are wearing clothing that are tight and just hugging you. Am I reaching right now? Let me know down below in the comment section if you think I'm reaching right now, but this is how I feel. But back to our ancestors, more often than not walking around barefooted. I think two things can be right at the same time, and the two things I'm talking about right now are the two speculative reasons I gave as to why they possibly walk around barefooted. But hell, there might even be a third or a fourth or a fifth etc. reason as to why they chose to walk around barefooted. But then we cannot definitively say we know what their reasons are. All we can do is speculate. And I think we are not far or maybe I should say I here. I don't think I'm far from what their reasons could possibly be, because these people were not dumb. We know how medically advanced they were. They must have known that, you know, this was beneficial, hence why they did it. It's moments like this that really make me feel sad sometimes when we're talking about history and we really do not have their narrations, we don't have their side of the story to balance these conversations out, and sometimes all we can do is speculate with the evidence that we have and try to draw some conclusions and understanding as to why things happened the way they did back then. But what did them colonizers say? What did they say about the idea of walking around barefooted? It's backward, it's uncivilized, it's this, that, and the third. It's an uncouth behavior. I can never get myself to know what the right pronunciation of that word is, right? But you guys get my meaning. But now, what are they doing? They're promoting earthing. Now you have them folks talking about earthing online like it's a new concept, never existed before. They just discovered it.
Have you heard the concept earthing or grounding? Well, let me tell you a little bit about it. And there's science behind it. So if you want more information, you can go on to Mayo Clinic or do yourself a little bit internet search. Well, the idea is, and we know this, that the Earth's surface has electrons on it. And what happens when you spend time barefoot or laying down on, Mother Nature, or swimming, what ends up happening is that those electrons get inside your body and they neutralize those free radicals. Huge benefits for it, not only for sleep, for your mood, because you're out in the earth, and also you're helping your cell level, also with inflammation and chronic pain. So here's to you spending more time out on Mother Earth.
We tried to figure out how much charge the body takes in when you touch the earth. What happens is the body saturates with electrons practically instantaneously. It's so fast that you can't measure it. electrons from the Earth enter the body right away, and they coat the red blood cells so that the cells repel each other. And then they can't clump, and the blood viscosity goes down. It's easier for the heart to pump the blood pressure goes down, all kinds of cardiovascular issues, they go away.
It's now being spoken about in their medical field, and they are recommending it to their patients, talking about how good earthing is for the body and how it helps your white blood cells and your red blood kidney, and how this is something we need to start doing. I came by this video of them folks earthing in Australia. And now you see them walking around barefooted. Nobody's talking about how, oh, these people are poor, we need to gather money and buy them shoes. But if it's African people that are walking around barefooted all of a sudden now, that is ascribed to poverty. This is a typical example of the mentality of white is right, black is wrong, or white is right, brown is wrong. They can do it and all of a sudden it will become cool. But let it be an African on the continent walking around barefooted, just living their best life. The next thing you know, your picture is in Europe being shared there against your consent, with them folks talking about how, they need to provide shoes for them kids.
Like, not every kid you see walking around or playing around barefooted don't have shoes or have parents who can't afford them shoes. And hell, this is not me saying that there are people on the continent who can't afford shoes, because of course they are. Same way there are kids in the Americas or in Asia or in Europe that don't have shoes and could do with some new shoes. Poverty is everywhere. Making one group of people the face of poverty, that's what I have a problem with. And saying that, because someone looks a certain way or is walking around barefooted means that they are poor, like, that's not always the case. I just want to be clear on this.
Another good example of a repackaged idea is democracy. As we all know, democracy is a system of government where it's basically the people that decide on who they want to be their leader. Sorry if I keep looking down, I made notes so I don't forget my points, right? Please bear with me. And they can say if they don't want a leader anymore, if the leader is already there, they can vote to say we want this person gone. The idea of democracy today is ascribed to them folks. Democracy is something that existed in pre-colonial Africa. Pre-colonial Africans back then, our ancestors decided on who they wanted their leaders to be. Back then, even though they were operating with the monarchy kind of system, they had the right to say whether or not they wanted the king that they had. If the king was not serving them properly, or if he had just the do coin, they can say, no, man, you've got to go. Hence why they had cabinets of chiefs, and the chiefs were like what we call the House of Representatives, right? That's what they are. I can closely relate them to for today. And the chiefs basically are there to represent the people and bring to the palace what the people want and the people's minds and all of that. So democracy, it's not a new idea, it's not a new concept, it's not a new system, right? It's very old, but they were able to repackage this thing and put their faces on it, and they've kind of owned the idea of democracy, even though what they even believe is democracy is very much is a scam, because them folks, the democracy they are doing, we all know that it's not real democracy. They don't really believe in what true democracy is. Democracy to them is their idea of democracy is very flawed, where we see them perpetuate it in places that they go when they go to say, we are going to give them democracy. That's not what they are doing. We only see them folks talking about democracy or going to say, help bring democracy to people, when certain leaders there in certain positions in certain countries are not really working for them. So they go and cause problems and get the person or the people that they want in those positions up there, because that's how they benefit. If they really did like democracy, they'll be letting the people in these countries decide for themselves. But no, they don't do that. So their idea of democracy, if we want to get to the nitty-gritty of things, it really isn't democracy. Democracy is something else, but then they bring this facade, but then under the table, underground, what they are doing is very different. It's not very democratical. Is that a word? But yeah, democracy is a rebranded idea. It's one that they just slap their face on top, and now they go around championing it like they were the ones that even invented it or came up with the concept. And this is one thing that really frustrates me sometimes when I think about this concept, right? I just want to share it now that I'm on this topic. We operate so much under white supremacy to the point where I feel like the entire system of it has unfortunately inhabits, yes, that's the word, inhibit, no, that's the right word, it's inhibiting us from actually thinking outside of the box that them folks want us to think within. Because to think that democracy could have only been a concept that one group of people thought about is crazy. Because how is that even possible? Like, really, let's use our critical thinking. How is that possible that a concept of fairness and the people, choosing their leaders could have only been thought of by one group of people when humanity have existed for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years? And another one that gets to me is when I see people talk about the rule of law. Let's see what they say the rule of law is. I actually got down to an argument with one guy, an African brother on TikTok, that was talking about how it was them folks that brought the rule of law. What is the rule of law? The rule of law means that no one, including government, is above the law, where laws protect fundamental rights and justice is accessible to all. For somebody to think that this thing, rule of law that we just read out, is something or a concept, an idea that only one group of people could have thought of is crazy. This brother was legit trying to tell me that all through the time humanity has existed, no other group of people thought that, felt that, believed that nobody is above the law, including the government. This is one of the reasons why I really believe that white supremacy is very, very dangerous. Like, we all know white supremacy does a lot of damage, right? But I don't think that we've actually started talking about the damage that it does to Black people and other non-Black, non-white people's brains. The rule of law is basically saying, if we want to use today's terminology, follow the Constitution. Which in the terminology of back there, it would be follow the laws of the land. The laws of the land. Everybody was always under the laws of the land. Nobody was above it. So when you say the rule of law is like them that invented it, I'm like, can we screw our brains on tight and make sure that our brain cells are active? Like, if some of them are starting to dim, maybe they're losing some spark. We have electricity now. We can spark them back up. So, shut them back up and make them active. Because, like, we need to be serious. This is how we attribute things to them folks and give them credits that they don't even deserve. For things that, one, probably never even existed in the places that they were back then, right, during pre-colonial times. Because some of these things, when you look back in on their history, they were not operating using this fairness, democracy, rule of law arrangement. Because what were their monarchs doing? What were their monarchs doing, and how were the people, the everyday people back then, living under the laws of their monarchs? If you look into history, you find that the way they were living, the monarchs versus the everyday people that they called peasants, right, was very different. There was not one rule for everybody. Hell, there was no rule the monarchs even had to follow because they were the rule, they were the law. The people could not decide who they wanted their leaders to be. It's the people up there, the monarchs and the nobles and them folks, them up there at the time that were making all of the decisions. They did not have democracy. And then when you compare that history with what it was like on the continent, light and day. Okay, now that I'm on this topic, it just came to my mind. It wasn't on my notes before, but another example that I would even add to this list, I would say, is feminism. This might be a controversial take, but back then on the continent, pre-colonial times, African women were not getting subjugated. They were not getting oppressed.
A woman's place is in the kitchen. This is the European proverb. No African language has the equivalents. We didn't know about subjugating women in Africa until white men came to teach us. Even when they brought their missionary schools to Africa, they had to separate the schools from boys and girls. And what you can learn in a boys' school is what you can learn in a girls' school. We as Africans did not know about subjugation of anybody. If you are too bad for society, we chase you away. That's why there were no prison in Africa. Well, okay, your own is too much. Yeah, all the villagers will gather you. Yeah. Go and start your own village. No problem, no problem. Just go and start your own village.
They were not getting touched inappropriately. Have you seen our pre-colonial attires? I mean, today now we are modernizing our cultural attires because of, it's a different time, right? But if you see pre-colonial attires, like they tell a very different story about Africa. Back then we had queens, and no, I'm not talking about queens that are queens because they have a husband that is the king. I'm talking about queens that are queens because they are queens, right? They were doing ish, right? Leading kingdoms. Some of them even led men to war. And it's documented even in history about how shocked them colonizers were when they first came to Africa and they saw the dynamic here and they saw how women were held in high esteem down over here on the continent, right? It was a contrast for them where they were coming from, because where they were coming from, women were subjugated and seen as less than, just seen as vessels to, bear children, and, that's their only role. So to come to Africa, and then you are seeing that women are queens. Women used to be very much involved in political decisions. Kings used to ask their wives what they thought, using Oba Evonware, I believe, from the ancient kingdom of Benin as an example for this, right? They were like, what is this? And it's also said in history that them colonizers were so disturbed by this fact, they did not like the setup like very much. They didn't like it. They didn't like it because seeing women being positioned where they were, African women being positioned where they were in society, they were threatened by it. And of course, during the entire time of colonization, they found a way to infuse their European patriarchy mentality and all of that nastiness, slowly introduce it into the continent. And of course, they use their religion, they use Christianity and the Bible to back why this system that Africans, pre-colonial Africans had, of women being more than their vajayjays and their wombs, of women being active in politics and being sought out for knowledge and all of that great ish that we had going on back then. They use their religion to speak against it, to say why that is wrong, and say why African men need to make that switch and start acting how they acted, and start seeing women how they saw their women, and start treating women how they treated their women, and start subjugating women how they subjugated their women. And even till this day, we can find remnants of the culture of African women being active in society when you look at certain industries of ours. Like you look at the market industry, for example, in Nigeria, hell, I would even say in Africa in general, right? Women own that industry. The industry of markets is owned and run by women. Hair too is an industry in Africa that is owned, run, controlled by women. So you still kind of see like remnants of that culture of women having a place where they are empowered. But from what I've heard, in Europe, it's not the same thing. Women can't in Europe or in the Western world say they are the owners and the movers and the shakers and the controllers of the market industry. They can't say they are the owners and the movers and the runners and the controllers of the hair industry. That's something that African women have. And like I said, it's a remnant of the culture of women in African culture, the true African culture, because, sometimes when we talk about this African culture, is the post-colonial ish that we think is our culture. But if we want to get to like the nitty-gritty, the true cocoa of the matter of what our culture is, a lot of this ish that we claim today to be our culture are not exactly our culture. They are not. But I don't think my people are ready for this conversation, really, really ready for it, because a lot of us, unfortunately, have really we've beaten deep into what the colonizers actually want us to believe. But moving on.
So the reason why I say feminism is like a rebranded idea is because it's not a new idea. The idea or the concept of women having rights is one that our mothers from way back enjoyed in ways that we can only dream of right now in our modern time. And a lot of the time, if you look into the period where women enjoyed these rights in the past, you would find that there is, this nice, interesting pattern of it's a period where there was no foreign religion. none of them Abrahamic religions were present at the time, and you would find that it was when African people were still very heavily into their ancestral ways of worship. You would find that during those periods, during those times, women really flourished and enjoyed in society. Hell, just take a look at the gods in the various ancient African spirituality practices. You would find that a good number of them are women. That tells you a lot about how they saw women back then in the day. And I think that singular fact right there tells us everything we need to know about the time that our mothers from way back were and why they got to enjoy the things that they enjoyed the way they did, the rights that they enjoyed the way they did. So now compare that to how women are placed in them Abrahamic religions, and you see the very clear difference as to why a society that is being run by, or the people in said society, if they do believe in these, certain kind of religions, it can affect how the people, both men and women in said society, are going to be treated, and also how they are going to be seen, because it is a fact that religion plays a very big role on how cultures are shaped. So just to be clear, I'm not shitting on feminism or trying to appropriate the concept of it. I'm just saying that it is not a new concept. So people thinking and or saying the concept of feminism or the concept of women having rights is new is historically inaccurate, and I just wanted to point that out. And just to be clear, no, I am not saying that women are equal to men or that women would ever be equal to men, because I don't believe that. The same way I don't believe that men are equal to women or that men would ever be equal to women. We are two different genders with our strengths and our weaknesses. And I don't think that we are supposed to be battling to be equal to one another, because we would never be equal to one another. Because there are things that I can do as a woman and a man can't do. Same way there are things that men can do that I can't do as a woman. I think nature did what it did so well, and we are the equal half of one another. We balance ourselves just right. So trying to fight to want to outdo the other, I just think like it's pointless, because we can work together and achieve things. Like that's how it's supposed to be. And I must add that personally, I think it is inhumane for one to think that because of their gender, they are supposed to have more rights than another person. I think people who, regardless of their race, gender, or ethnicity, think and or believe that they are better or more superior or should have rights over anyone or should be able to subjugate anyone because of whatever the reason, race, gender, or ethnicity, I think those people are lame and need mental evaluation. I mean, come on, it's 2024. We are supposed to be the most intelligent of the species. We are at a time that is dubbed the most civilized era that humanity has ever seen. I think it's about time that we start acting like it.
My next point should be medicine. The idea of modern medicine. I think at this point, everybody should know this as a repackaged idea. Back in the day, we used to boil teas out of plants, and people who are into herbal medicine till date still use these plants to cure themselves. I even know how to brew some of them for myself into tea when I have a fever or I'm down with malaria, right? My mom is better than me, but I can do just the, simple ones. I know surface information. I know a pawpaw leaf here and a mango leaf there and a bitter leaf here. There are leaves you can put together and boil into tea, and you can use it to treat the Rona.
We do not speak his name.
But what do we do today, right? They take these leaves and instead of boiling them into teas, they grind them instead and dry them and do God knows what now to them. And then they put them into tablet forms. But you're basically taking the same thing. And hell, some of these tablets are not even safe because they have some other things in there that it's not good for the health, but they put this ish in there, right? So it's a rebranded idea that they even found a way to tarnish. Modernization is basically the repackaging, the rebranding of old ideas. It's basically us finding a way to put a more modern spin to it.
And sometimes to me, it seems it's about also creating a new, different kind of aesthetics.
right? Because some of the way things were done sometimes in the past is very different from how things are being done today. Like back then, our ancestors used to cook using, I want to bring a pot for you, a native pot, so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So this is what I mean. This is called an ewere in my mom's language, in Urobo. This is a native traditional soup bowl pot, or a soup pot bowl. I'm not sure how to describe it in English, but it's a pot. You can put this on the fire and you can eat directly from this, right? We use this to warm banga soup. And of course, there are various sizes. This one isn't an actual pot. This is basically a bowl that you can warm your soup in, but it's not the pot you use for the cooking. You cook somewhere else and then you warm later here. A banga soup warmed in ewere is different from a banga soup that's warmed in like a regular steel pot. It gives the soup a nice flavor. I don't know what it is about this pot, but there is a difference when you warm your soup in this. I like eating from my ewere. I really love my ewere. I go everywhere with this. I love things like this. I love native things. I have a couple of native things in my house and wooden bowls and stuff like that. I love all these kind of things. But moving on. The point is, there are bigger ones, right? This one is just a soup bowl, but there are bigger ones that you can actually do your full cooking in. Some people think this is local. It's probably not as fancy as your regular modern pots that you have in different colors and different designs and all of that ish.
Which is crazy to me because I think our ancestral cooking pots and pans and utensils are very beautiful. And I love how rich they look and just how much they exude culture. And to me, the aesthetics that they give hits different. And something else that is actually very interesting about them is that they are very healthy to cook and eat with, which is something that we cannot say about all our modern cooking pans and pots. Like, for example, non-stick pans are very dangerous, and like the chemical they use to grease the pan to give it that non-sticky appeal, like it's not good for the health. And that's a conversation that people are having these days, and they're trying to make people not, buy these pans anymore. And the crazy thing about non-stick pans is that when you go online to check just how safe it is to use, you will find people talking about how, it's generally safe to use, but when you use it, don't, put up the heat to over a particular degree, because when you do, the, whatever that they use to grease the pan or coat the pan to make it into a non-stick pan will start to give out some kind of fume, and this fume is dangerous for your health. And then I'm like, wait, come on, like, what do you mean? Earlier you said it's safe to use, but now you are saying if I use it under a particular heat now is no longer safe. Like, man, is it safe or is it not safe? Something that is safe is supposed to be safe all through, not safe one point in time and then another point in time it's not safe. Like, if I don't have that 100% assurance that something is safe, then it's not safe. Like, let's stop playing these semantics. Like, give me a definitive yes or no. If you can't give me a definitive yes that this pot is safe, that means to me that it's not safe. That's how I see it. While on the other hand, it is said that if you cook with pots made out of clay, that's actually more good for your health, because not only do clay pots help our food taste better, clay pots adds very many important nutrients to our foods, which are going to be extremely beneficial to our body. But people love using our modern pans and pots more because they are tied to a certain aesthetic, and of course they are tied to civilization. I know this is not me taking jabs at people who use modern cooking tools, because I'm one of those people. I have modern pots in my house, but I just want to use this opportunity to highlight the fact that not all of these, our modern pots and pans, are good for the health, because I think that's something people need to know. But back to the conversation.
This is where the idea of pots and bowls came from. At least for African people, right? Other people have their ancient pots and ancient bowls and spoons and all of that. But with modernization, you build on these ideas and you put your spin to it. Now we have different types of pots, we have different colors, we have different designs and all of that ish, right? Some even have like, glass covers. That is modernization, but this is civilization. It's the ancient ideas that we are now building on. But a lot of people still haven't been able to come to the realization that these modern ideas are not civilization. These are civilizations. The Asian bowls that they use in China, that's like, parts of civilization. The Asian bowls and pots they use in pre-colonial America, that's civilization, right? That's what it is. Somehow we have blurred the lines. I don't know how we did it, when we did it, but unfortunately we blurred the lines between civilization and modernization, and now today we confuse modernization with civilization. So now the modern pots and bowls that we use today are rebranded ideas of the initial. Yeah, that's the point. Education is another rebranded idea. And this is something I touched on this particular video more heavily, but I'm going to still touch on it again.
This is the man who went down in history as the person who invented education. Just like most people think that civilization started in Europe. Well, it did not. Civilization started in Mesopotamia and the Great Kemet of Africa. Then later on, about 1200 BCE, was when civilization was reaching the Central America, the modern day Mexico. So there is no way a white man would have invented education when the first university in the world, the University of Timbuktu, was located in Africa. The University of Timbuktu was established by Mansa Musa, who was a Malian empire and the richest man in the world by that time. Subjects like philosophy, cultural studies, language studies, advanced African grammar were mandatory, while subjects like history, algebra, physics, medicine, chemistry, arithmetic, and astronomy from the Dogon people were totally optional. Students who did complete the course of study received clothes, blocks of salt, livestock, and money as gifts upon their graduation. Graduation ceremony consisted of wearing a white garment while riding a white horse towards the university.
The system of education and educating is as old as man itself. Cultures for hundreds of thousands of years, pre-colonial cultures, have participated in the idea, the concept, and the system of education. They had for generations upon generations be educating their people. That's how they pass on their knowledge from generations to generation. That's how they pass on skills from generation to generation. That's how they pass on cultures and languages. All of this is from generation to generation. That is what education is. Western education, modern education, is basically a rebrand. They just slapped Western and modern on top of the education to make it theirs. And of course, they championed it using colonization, right? But really look at the education. What are they doing that is different in their education, that is different from what other cultures have been doing? The only difference between modern Western education and pre-colonial education is that they were not doing it formally, and I'm putting formally in quotes because our idea of what's formal and what's not formal is still tied to what them folks think what formal and informal is. But conversation for another day, okay? But like people were doing it informally before and it was working just fine for them. Make it seem like it's something different that they are doing when they're basically just doing the exact same ish. They are doing the exact same ish that people used to do before, only that now they are making people do it in 4 walls of a classroom. It's the same thing. It's rebranding. And when you look at the tweakments that they do to these already existing ideas because they want to rebrand them, it's not even very many tweaking they should do. They should do much tweaking, just very small tweaking. Just tweak is more like, and then that's it. In their mind, they've created something new. And you have to now think, okay, why can't they do much tweaking to it? Why can't it look like astronomically different from the already existing idea? It's because the already existing idea was already that great. To the point where there is almost nothing much that they can change to it because the idea is just that great. So all they can do is just like, put small spin, just like very small, and then find a way to deceive the masses and make you feel and think, oh, they've done something great. And usually they do this by first invalidating the previous one. That is another point that people have to pay attention to as well. They make these little tweakments to these things and find a way to deceive you that this, repackaged idea is a new idea by first making you believe that the old idea never existed.
And if they do acknowledge the old idea, they will just outrightly tell you that it wasn't good, it was backward, it was uncivilized, or my favorite one, it's demonic.
Once you allow yourself believe all of these negative things they have to say about this idea, now all of a sudden the idea ceases to exist. Now they can now come and feed you the new idea that they have, which is actually the stolen one that they just demonized to you. That's how they get away with this repackaging. And I think I want to end on art today. Art too is another good example of how them folks repackage existing idea. A good example would be Picasso. For those of us who don't know, a lot of his art that he's widely known for are said to have been stolen ideas from African arts.
Oh yeah, Picasso really stole from African art. And some people talk about it as an African period that only lasted a couple of years, but I would say that it was his inspiration from African art that shifted him into the style that defined his most celebrated works well after that. In general, he owed everything to African artists, because before his African period, he was making stuff like this. It's very different, it's very inventive for sure, but his people still look like he's making realistic humans, Until Lambo, 1907, African period. Now he's playing with form and way more asymmetry. The rhythm is totally different. Apparently it starts one night at Gertrude Stein's house where Henri Matisse is here with this sculpture he has. Picasso becomes obsessed with it and clutches it all night. And then his obsession grows when he goes to the museum, which has all of these looted, stolen artifacts and art pieces from European imperialism in Africa. The inspirations are very clear. There's tons of memoir he writes, there's tons of friends that talk about it, but it doesn't end in 1909, because after that he enters his Cubist period with Georges Braque, and that's just also very clearly lifted from African art. I recommend this article, it's really, really good. She writes that Picasso's use of two-dimensionality, fierce geometry, and flat planes was only possible because African sculptors and carvers had been mastering the art of abstraction for centuries. Later in life, Picasso started denying that anything he had made had anything to do with African art at all, and people seemed to kind of believe him. It was clear that he had very little respect for African people at all. The article reads that, according to the post-colonial scholar Simon Kakandi, Picasso was infatuated with the idea of what he considered primitive and tribal, but there is very little evidence that he showed interest in Africans as people and producers of culture. And he was a violent abuser, and that's a whole thing too. I just wanted to throw that in there. Modern artists were trying to figure out how to unlearn the realism that art school had taught them. So they looked to be inspired by people like children, mentally insane, non-white, people that didn't go to school, people of lower classes, used their art to figure out how to do abstraction and then took all the credit. And I don't know, here we are now.
I woke up to a few comments today of people being like, oh man, I'm sad. I don't like Picasso's art anymore. I keep losing all my heroes and stuff like that, But it's like, guys, don't be sad. If you liked Picasso's art, then you'll love the real thing. There's a whole world of incredible African art for you to discover. It's so rad. African art from a long time ago or African art today. I also heard a couple of people saying oh, I wish that we weren't taught about Picasso at all. And I don't agree with that either. We need to talk about these things. You learn so much more about his art and all of his friends' art when you know about the African influences. Rather, we should study these movements very closely. Draw out the connections. There's so much to learn.
And again, even in this art example, you see a particular pattern, a particular behavior, where when it's one group of people that are doing it, right? One group of people doing it, it's not acknowledged. It's not a big deal. It gets demonized. It gets looked down on until they decide that that's what they want to do. And then they put hype over it. They hype it and then they spread it and make it theirs basically, and then they plaster their faces and their name on it. And now this ish that, you know, they stole will now be the popular one. The idea, their rebranded idea, their stolen ideas will not be the ones that are popular, while the initial creators, you know, continue to stay in the dark. It's an old behavior. The same ish that they look down on, demonize, they would turn around and start doing the exact same thing, and then they praise themselves for it and then make it known to the world that is them that, you know, invented it or created it or came up with the idea, when basically it's an idea that they stole. In conclusion, there is a reason why Africa is known and called the cradle of civilization. It's just unfortunate that we are being scammed on a global scale, especially African people who are being scammed and gaslit on a global scale. But unfortunately, we still haven't realized it yet. So we fall for the lies, we fall for the scam. This is basically Yahoo. At this point, we've come to the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching. I would see you guys in the next one. Bye.